Welcome, everyone. Hi, my name is Mia Park, and this interview series is called In Response, Interviews with Intriguing Internalizers. I am in Chicago, Illinois, and this interview series was my own internal response to the three quarters of 2020. The year's not out yet, and it's a very exciting being alive and a human being right now, especially in America. I'll say that. So it is October 23rd. The world is still handling this global health pandemic, which is like spiking in the cases of people contracting it and dying. So there's a fear atmosphere going on right now. We in America are having an election happening. So there's like another layer of like fear and intensity with that. We just had a debate last night. Of course, there's still this outcry of racial injustice happening, especially in America. The awakening of that and the reckoning with that, it's still, very much part of what's happening. And then there's global warming. Here in Chicago, it was 70 degrees yesterday in like towards the end of October. So there's strange, very unusual things happening in the world. And here to give an internal response and a report from Deep Mind and Deep Soul about that is Ii-Epstein.
Aloha.
Aloha. So Hannah is also still in Chicago with me. And Hannah and I know each other through the theater scene. So she's an accomplished playwright and a go-getter. And I consider you an activist through your, let alone through your artwork, let alone just your existence of who you are. And we'll get into that. But I met Hannah through playwriting and through the theater company she started called Nothing Without a Company that just draws on this really interesting voices to share. And let's get into that. So Hannah, first of all, is there anything else you want people to know about you?
Nothing specific. I'm from Hawaii, Oahu, the North Shore area, traditional homelands of my ancestors, the Kanaka Maoli, or the Native Hawaiians. And I'm currently in Chicago, in Uptown, the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. So that's where I currently am. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks. Excuse me. Are you in that area because there's kind of an indigenous intention in that neighborhood?
Well, I'm in Uptown. I'm in Little Vietnam. And a lot of the reason why I live here in this particular area is it's the closest I can get to Hawai'i and Chicago. So it's the diversity of the Asian folks around here, the food at the Asian markets. I can get fresh taro. I can get taro leaf. I can get a lot of things that I have been grown up with cooking and food. And so it just brings me closer to home being so far away.
You got to plan that. You're like, where are the Asian markets that have my food?
Right. Cool, and what can I get where? And where can I get aloha shoyu? And where can I get all these other things? And then the Filipino foods at Seafood City. And so because I grew up in such a mixing pot of a state, then it allows me to broaden my horizons with my cooking and how I eat. Yeah.
That's right. So let's translate food if I can hang on you for a second. Yeah. And would you mind talking about sharing like how you grew up, like your kind of how you identify ethnically and culturally in Hawaii?
Yeah. So I am Native Hawaiian, and I suppose it's the majority of the minority out in Hawaii, which is really nice to be surrounded by folks who look like me, being able to grow up with dolls that look like me, with local television, local theater, like where everyone on stage looks like me. And it's moving to the mainland, there was this strange kind of racial change in how I viewed things because I didn't realize there was such a racial divide in the greater America. I had learned about some of it, but I had not experienced the majority of it. And so moving here was very interesting in that way, because it was like, I have dreads, and a lot of Black folks would be like, hey, you're a white girl with dreads. And I'd be like, oh, I'm Hawaiian. And they're like, oh, you're cool. You're cool. It's fine. It's fine. And I get racially, I'm a racial chameleon in the mainland. People assume I am of the culture they are of as well, which I'm not upset about, but I'm also very corrective with. Like, oh no, I'm Native Hawaiian. This is where I'm from. This is my culture. And I appreciate that you see yourself in me. And I respect that tremendously, but I also have my own identity here.
Isn't
Yeah.
that interesting? I think that that's so true because people want to connect with you, so they see them
Yeah.
in you. But there's the next level of development that's like you can connect with someone and they don't have to be like you at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And to like see that and to see how people want to connect, it's so amazing how much people do want to. And like, especially right now during the pandemic when we are all so physically separated. It's easy and so humbling to
Mm.
see in someone's eyes through their mask that they recognize someone like them and they smile a little. You can see it in their eyes when they
You
smile
see it,
with their
right, right,
mask
right,
on.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I know the next two questions I'm going to ask are what I ask every participant, but I want to hang on this because this is so fascinating to me. So, my heritage is in East Asia and Korea,
Yeah.
right? And so who's we? The world considers Asia to be this giant diaspora. It's like
Right.
weird because it's a geographical thing, because it's not cultural, and then they lump AAPI together, Asian American Pacific Islander.
Right.
And like we can't even get the acronym right because sometimes it's APIA, Asian Pacific Islander
Oh,
American, or it's AAPI. You know what I mean? Like, and so sometimes people assume that Hawaiians would be part of the Asian American or Asian experience. So being
right.
Native Hawaiian, what do you think about all that?
I mean, I grew up in the 90s in Hawaii where it was such a melting pot of immigration that had happened through the sugarcane fields, the pineapple fields, and moving folks over from most of Asia into Hawaii, that I grew up in a space where we were all the same, even though we were all different. We all shared our foods and our cultures in a way that lifted each other up, as opposed to, oh no, that's just the Chinese New Year thing, you've got to be Chinese to do that, or that's just a Hawaiian thing, you got to be Hawaiian to do that. There was no separation in that. It was, oh, you enjoy this culture and cultural movement, come join us, come sit at the table. And so there was always space for anyone to come and sit. Yeah. Yeah, it's
That see,
very
that's
different than the mainland.
it is. We were talking
Yeah.
beforehand that, excuse me, maybe places like New Orleans, and
Right.
Hawaii in what we call America, uh, they're just so culturally different than the rest of America. It's just
Yeah.
so, like preserved with that kind of like appreciation for mixing
Hmm.
what's there and what's coming in. But speaking about what's coming in, let's ask here, what's the outside world like for you? And then what's your deep soul report from that point?
Yeah, well, today specifically, the outside world is rainy and gloomy and cold and a little tiring. I woke up tired today. And I think my internal response to that is some sort of homesickness, home longing, not necessarily sickness, just the longing to be on the land, the Aina that I am from. I tend to go back to Hawaii every year, year and a half. I've now been away for over 2 years, and it's the longest I've ever been away from the lands. And I find that when I am there, when I have my feet on the sand, my feet on the ground with nothing between us, I generate this energy. It's almost like plugging in a battery, right? Plugging in your cell phone. I start to recharge. And then when I can come away from Hawaii and be again in the mainland for a year and a half, 2 years, I somehow can maintain that charge. But
Mm.
I'm at the point today, and I have been for the past few weeks, of I need to go home. I need to recharge. I need to recharge my soul, recharge my energy that can only come from the Pacific Ocean, that can only come from the Pacific Islands. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So that's kind of where I am internally today.
You're longing for the homeland for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love how you're connecting to the land. We talked about the food thing. You can go for
Right.
the food, but
Oh,
you're
yeah.
talking about digging your feet in the sand. Um, that's great. So, talking about kind of that poetic way that you connect. So, you are a playwright. You have your MFA in playwriting, and you have your
Yeah.
undergrad degree also in writing. So, you are a writer.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so, wearing your playwright's hat, how are you translating the world right now?
majority of my plays are about Hawaii or about people who just happen to live in Hawaii, happen to be in Hawaii. And so I get to kind of escape my world by going into these plays and remembering the smells of what it's like to be in Chinatown in Hawaii, to remember the taste of what it's like to eat an auto cake cheesecake, like the one thing you can only get in Hawaii. And there are many things like that that I get to divulge in through my plays. And so it's a nice way to process my thoughts about the islands, but also not just like the good stuff though, like the bad stuff too, the things that people tend to not talk about when talking about like the overthrow of Hawaii, or what the state is of Hawaii now, with it being such a military state and what that means. And so I get to explore like not only the stuff I remember in nostalgia, but the things that I need to remember of why and what I am fighting for being on the mainland, becoming educated so I can bring that back to Hawaii and say, hey, here's the things I can teach you now because of what I've learned out in the world. So that, yeah. So there's been like a channeling through my work.
I appreciate that, Hannah, because it's like we can only change the outside, but what we can change on the inside and what we can do in our world that we know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like you're not writing about like, Russia because you're from Hawaii. You're going to write about what you know.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Speaking of talking of the dark side of Hawaii, I'm so fascinated by your drug trilogy of plays. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you wanted to even do all that?
Yeah, so I started with Not One Batu, and Batu in Filipino means meth, methamphetamine, the meth rock. And so I am an ex-drug user. I have been in recovery for over 15 years now. And I was in a class in Hawaii, or I'm sorry, in a class in Chicago, in a playwriting class, and a teacher walks in, first day of class, she writes her phone number on the board. It's an 808 phone number. And 808 is Hawaii's area code, no matter what island you're from. So I started speaking Pidgin to her, and she was like, wait. You need to write a play in Pidgin. I was like, you can do that? So she prompted me to write a play in Pidgin. So I started with Not One Batu, pulling out the elements that I remember from being an addict, relationships I remember from being an addict, and kind of putting that play together through this one class. So she introduced me, Carson Becker, she introduced me to Kumukuhua Theater and Harry Wong, the artistic director there. And right away, he allowed me, when I was there, to just do a reading. Honolulu Theater for Youth had some actors just rehearsing, and they were like, sure, do a reading. And it's the first time I'd ever heard it out loud. And I asked Harry that day, and I was like, how do I submit this to your theater? And he's like, you're so mainland. You already did. And then I get a call a few months later saying, okay, hey, we're going to put up your play. This is when it's going to be and where it's going to be. So it premiered in Hawaii in 2016. And so it's a play all about meth. Honey Girl is a ex-drug user and a meth dealer. And it's just about her one night dealing meth at a park where her mom comes to visit her, who's also an addict. And so it's a very intense play around the idea of meth, but more so on how meth and the drug culture has impacted Hawaiian culture, has impacted what is a poor and a poor culture because of how the annexation had happened through Hawaii, what was taken away from Hawaiian folks when our lands were taken away from us. And so it's a deeper meaning than just, drugs, but there was also an intensity that happened around it being about meth, because there's so many people who either use or know someone who uses or has someone in their family who uses, and to be able to talk about addiction and how that affects us as Hawaiians, how that affects us as cultural people, and why we run to it as opposed to run away from it. And so it did open up a lot of conversations with ex-drug addicts saying, there was one guy in particular who came to see the play in Hawaii that afterwards said, I was going to go use meth. I saw that you were doing a play about meth, so I came to see it instead, and I'm never using again. And it's stories like that. It's one person that was impacted that makes playwriting worth it, that makes doing theater worth it. It's that changing, what you were saying, the changing of the internal and how people look at themselves and look at other people.
Man, that's a great story. That's a great explanation. Thank you. So glad that your art touched a person, like not only viscerally but practically. Because when Not One But Two opened in Chicago, I love stories like yours. It's like, who is writing a play about meth addicts in Hawaii, in Chicago? Who is this? Like, what is going on here? And it was you. So those stories are just as important as like the debates last night, which is like an international, national thing. But your story, what you're saying, is just as important because it still has to do with the human experience, right?
Yeah, and in Chicago, it does this thing too that's separate from what it does in Hawaii, which is it shows people like, oh, Hawaii isn't grass skirts and flower lays or plastic flower lays. Like, Hawaii isn't coconut bras? What? I thought it was a postcard. It's real people with real problems? What?
Right. You live on an island in paradise. You can just pick fruit from a tree. What do you have to worry about?
Yeah, so it prompted folks in Chicago who had come to see it to do their own research, to learn about like what it really is to be in Hawaii, that it's not just your resort hotel with the fire dancers, that it's like a real place with real people.
That's amazing. Yeah. I remember when I saw I love the way that your theater company staged it. There was a very creative, organic way of doing it. To me, the way it was staged had a Hawaiian vibe to it. And that you walked in, it was like people hanging out. There was music. People would come, the actors would come up with that kind of interactive theater, which I love as a participant, as an audience member. And then the play happened outside. Like we sat outside and there was Lake Michigan. Well, it was like, there's the lake. It felt very Hawaiian in the experience of being organic. And we were all sitting outside watching this theater thing happen right at the foot of the lake. It was great.
Yeah, and we couldn't have done that without Aloha Center Chicago, because they came in and they played music for us every night, and they made sure that it felt warm and welcoming to everyone that came in. And then our designers were fantastic on that. Our set designer dug out that entire lake just so everyone could have that view.
What a great thing that your designer did, because it looked endless. So that, boy, you guys must have that budget. Where'd you get that money from?
Oh,
Give it to me.
yeah.
I need it for my theater.
Right.
But I want to steer the conversation back to you two, what's going on now. Yeah. So I know you were saying like today, the weather and the fact that you haven't had the chance to dig your feet into your homeland to re-energize is affecting you. So like, if you're very multidimensional, you're not just a playwright, you're also actually, I think you're an activist as well. Right. So like how do you feel like you're going to shift from the emotional place that you're in now, if you want to get out of it? I mean, like, what do you do to kind of shift to a different place?
So I suppose like I like being in it as a reminder that I do have ancestral homelands. Not everyone has that. Not everyone has a place that they can say, I have generations of people that came from this location that I can return to and feel whatever I'm feeling. And for me to kind of move into that more, I do work with Aloha Center Chicago. I am a board member there and a hula student. And so we do hula through Zoom right now on Wednesday nights. And that connects me on a weekly basis to my language, to my movement, to my body. And then in the mornings, about 5 days a week, my wife and I have a little exercise routine where she does yoga and I do stretching. We do the same poses. I just call it stretching. Because there's like a weird stigma on yoga in my brain for some reason. And then we'll do a bunch of yoga, and then I'll do a bunch of hula while she does more yoga. And so I'm trying to connect at least 4 or 5 days a week to dancing hula, allowing me to hear the music, feel the music, and move my body to this thing. Also getting exercise, because I do eat spam, like, you know, I eat like a can every couple weeks, or like I do eat the foods that I want to eat, not just what's good for me. And so to maintain my weight and strength, I do my workout routine.
You
So
know,
it's
that's
like
funny,
both.
but that's awesome. Thank you for that. I love that. Again, it's wonderful how you're connecting to what is touches you. So I was introduced to spam because I grew up from Philly, right? My parents are from Korea.
Oh yeah.
And we have these kind of rolls. They look like maki rolls, but we call them kimbap. It's just like, you know, the lathers, the raw seaweed, and then
Oh
you roll them
yeah.
up, and you cut them up. It's actually nothing like maki. But anyway, my mom would fry up some spam and put the spam in the kimbap, and it was my favorite. So then I got older and I was like, was that like an American thing of my mom, my Korean mom, to put spam in the kimbap? Because like that's a Hawaiian thing, and we're in Philly, and she's never been to Hawaii before. You know? So it's that interesting. It made the kimbap taste so good. I used to love spam kimbap. I don't know, it's something. So I feel you on that.
Yeah, it became a cultural staple in Hawaii, like through World War II, because cheap canned meat that you could share and eat. And so it became that thing, like that Vienna sausage, like these canned meats became more of a staple in Hawaiian culture through the 1940s. Yeah.
Interesting. Now you're teaching me. Thank you, because you were so much more closely tied to the World War II experience out there. I mean, I guess in
Right.
America, but interesting. Cool. Well, this has been so fascinating talking to you.
Yeah.
Hana, I so appreciate how you're so open about everything, your creative process, your exercise, the fact that you are a recovering drug addict and that you're an artist and that you have a wife. So thank you for just being an
Yeah.
inspiration that way. Seriously.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, can I
Everyone,
plug my show right quick
of
before
course
we
you
get off?
can do it. Do
Yeah,
it.
so I have a reading coming up. It's called The Kasha of Kaimuki. It is a thriller play set in the most famous haunted house in Hawaii, kind of like the Amityville Horror House of Hawaii. And the reading will be on Halloween, 2 p.m. Chicago time, through Chicago Dramatists, Kumukuhua Theater, and Nothing Without a Company. So,
That sounds great. So, and there are links to that in Hana's bio. So that's awesome. And we want to give a shout out to Melissa Kong, another fabulous playwright.
yes. Oh,
It,
I love her.
yeah. So she gave a little shout out to you on Facebook there. Hey, Melissa, we're gonna get you on here soon too. But thanks so much, Hana. You were just lovely.
It's
Yeah.
great to
So
see you. Thank you for
it's good to
having me.
Of course. And thank you, friends, for watching. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, for listening. If you want to support me, Mia Park, with my team and my team in creating this series and the podcast, you can become a patron of us at $1 a month, even at that. And that is patreon.com/Mia Park. So, Hana, thank you so much.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha, aloha. Oh, okay. Am I doing it right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks.